Hey there, it's Brian Manning, political asylum lawyer, and I'm going to share with you in this video a few really important things about the personal statement you'll be writing in support of your asylum case. I'm going to explain to you what the personal statement is and why it's important, and then I'm going to give you 7 tips that I hope you'll keep in mind in writing your personal statement. This guidance that I'm giving you is informed by my experience as an asylum officer with the US government. And as you can imagine, in that role, I saw lots and lots of personal statements, and over time, I learned key characteristics that make for a good one. And it's my privilege now to share with you these perspectives to help you present the strongest asylum case possible. All right, first, what am I talking about when I refer to a personal statement? Well, it's basically you explaining what's happened to you or what it is about you that makes you fear that you'd be harmed if you had to return to your country. It's your story told in your own words. You see, the asylum application called Form I-589 asks a few questions about what's happened to you and why you fear being harmed in your country, but there's really not space on the form to be able to express yourself. Also, you don't want the flow and feel of your story to be dictated by questions on a form. Writing a personal statement out in narrative form allows you to say what you want to say in the order that you want to say it and in as many words as it takes to say it properly. So, the personal statement is basically your answer to the questions on the application form, but it's in a format that you control. It's your uninterrupted story told on your terms. What you'll do is just write one sentence or so in the application form itself to respond to the questions, just something very general, but then say something like, please see my attached personal statement for more detail. For example, let's look at Part B of the application form, question 1A. It asks whether you, your family, or close friends or colleagues have ever experienced harm or mistreatment or threats in the past by anyone. Let's say, for the sake of example, that you've been attacked 3 times by members of a rival political party. Well, you would not talk in detail about each of those 3 incidents in response to these questions, and you wouldn't try to address for each of them the 4 sub-questions listed here. Rather, you would want to say something like, members of the political party that is a rival to my own political party physically attacked me 3 times. Please see my personal statement, which I'm attaching as part of this application, for more detail. And then you'll include your personal statement with your application when you're ready to submit the application. The personal statement, which will be just a few pages of one-sided printed out paper, will go behind the application form in the package that you'll submit. It's considered part of your application. Note that you may hear the personal statement called other things. Some people refer to it as a declaration or an affidavit or a personal narrative. For our purposes, all those really mean the same thing. It's your story and your explanation of why you're afraid to go to your country. And it's a crucial part of your asylum case. Now, why is that? Why is the personal statement so important? Well, for starters, it's one of the few things that the person deciding your case, whether that's an asylum officer or immigration judge, will actually look at and consider carefully. These people are overwhelmed with work. They're extremely unlikely to look as carefully at other things asylum applicants submit in their case, like information about their country or letters from other people about the case, or even sometimes evidence that shows the person has been harmed or threatened. But they do pay attention to your personal statement. You can count on them having read it carefully. So it's your chance to set the stage. It's your opportunity to make the asylum officer or judge like you and your case before you ever appear for your asylum interview or court hearing. You want to go into your interview or hearing with the decision maker already understanding the key facts of your case, the key things that have happened, or the key things about you that make you qualified for asylum. Now, another reason the personal statement is so important is that it may be the only chance you get to really lay out your story and express yourself. You see, at your asylum interview and in immigration court, you do not just get to talk as much as you would like. It's not like they allowed you 10 minutes to just talk and say anything you want, ensuring that you'll get to make your point. No, rather, you'll be asked a bunch of questions about your situation, and you will not be in a position to redirect the conversation where you want it to go. Asylum officers, and in the immigration court context, judges and government lawyers, will take things where they want them to go. They'll also interrupt you, and they won't let you finish your thought. In short, you cannot count on being able to express what you want to express at your asylum interview or in immigration court. That's what makes your personal statement so important. It's your chance to say what you want to say and to say it how you want to say it. It may be your only chance to really express yourself and tell your story. That's why you've got to take it seriously and you've got to do it right. Okay, we're moving on. Here are my recommendations for crafting a personal statement that really has a chance to influence the decision maker in your case. Here are 7 tips for your personal statement. Tip number 1, tell the truth. Honesty is always the best policy. Be honest in everything related to your asylum case, including your personal statement. Do not exaggerate or stretch the truth. Don't be deceptive or misleading. Just say plainly and honestly what has happened to you and why it is that you fear you could be harmed in your country. In addition to just being an unethical thing to do, lying or otherwise being less than honest and forthcoming is not smart from a strategic standpoint. There's a good chance you'll get caught, which will get your application denied and can have serious long-term immigration consequences for you and possibly even criminal consequences. So just be honest. All right, tip number 2, keep in mind as you write your statement the overall objective. Understand, first and foremost, the objective of your personal statement. It's to demonstrate that you're at risk of being seriously harmed in your country and to show what it is about you that's motivating the people to harm you. You're trying to show that the harm is so bad, so severe, that it rises to the level of persecution, as that term is understood in the asylum law context. And you're trying to show that it's your possession of one of what's referred to as the 5 protected characteristics that's causing the bad guys to want to harm you. So how do you do this? Well, you talk in your personal statement about what's already happened to you in your country, describing any physical harm you've already suffered or any threats you've received, whether directly or indirectly. And you'll also want to talk about people you know who have had bad things happen to them if you fear that similar things could happen to you for the same reason that they happened to those people. For example, if you and your family members practice a certain religion and your family members have had problems because of that, you should talk about this in your personal statement, even if you haven't personally had the same problems. The idea is that people doing the bad things may want to do them to you too, because they've already shown that they treat people who are like you bad. All right, next up, personal statement tip number 3. This is all about what to include in your personal statement and how to structure it. What you include in your personal statement and how you arrange it in terms of what goes where and what gets the most attention is very important. And because it's so important, this is by far the longest tip in this video. Now, after having seen and helped clients do a bunch of these, I've settled on a framework that I believe is most effective for conveying what you need to convey. The first couple or maybe few lines of your personal statement should be background information that provides context for the rest of your story. For example, someone whose asylum case is based on, let's say, female genital mutilation could say something like this. I grew up in a small village in western, insert country name here. My family and most of the villagers there belong to the, insert tribe name here. They take the traditional tribal and religious customs very seriously. One of the traditions is female genital cutting. My mother and all of my sisters had this done to them. My problems began when I was around the age at which this is normally done to a girl. So that's it. That's enough background information, just one paragraph. 2 or 3 sentences is often enough, definitely no more than 5 sentences. And note that what I just read from my example is directly relevant to the person's asylum claim, which has to do with female genital mutilation. It does not talk about where the person went to elementary school, what sports they liked to play, who their best friend was growing up, or anything else that isn't related to their claim. Oh, and by the way, all the examples I give in this video are made up, hypothetical situations that are just for the purpose of illustrating a point. You definitely should not be copying this stuff. Your personal statement should be based on your specific personal circumstances. Anyway, you'd be amazed at all of the irrelevant things that people put in their personal statement, and I actually get it. I understand that people want the reader to get a sense of who they are and what's important to them and the like. But I've got to tell you, from the other side of the desk, in my experience as an asylum officer, you should leave all that out. Just stick in your personal statement to things that are necessary to explain how you've been harmed or why you may be harmed in the future and what the reason for that harm is. Okay, so that's the introduction. The next part, and the overwhelming majority of your personal statement, should be focused on the incidents that demonstrate to the asylum officer or immigration judge that you have a well-founded fear of persecution. I'll say more in just a second about how to talk about those things. You want to talk about each of the specific incidents, all the things that have happened that make you think someone may want to hurt you. Now, if there have been lots of things like that, then you don't want to talk in detail about all of them because, as we'll discuss in a minute, we've got to keep this personal statement short. Focus on just a few incidents, like 4 or 5 of the most significant ones. The times they did the worst things to you, or threatened you most directly, or did or said something that indicates why they've targeted you. Okay, after you've talked about incidents of harm or threats or things that indicate someone wants to hurt you, spend just a few sentences explaining what it was that finally caused you to decide to leave your country, and very briefly explain how you got out of the country. For example, people sometimes say things like, "After the last attack, I knew they were serious about trying to kill me. That's when I decided I could not be safe in my country. To flee, I got a tourist visa from the US Embassy in my country's capital. My sister helped me afford a plane ticket, and I left my country on January 10th, 2020. On the way, I changed planes in Dubai and arrived in the United States at Washington Dulles Airport near Washington, D.C. on January 11th. Okay, got it? So, what's next? You don't need to talk about what you've been up to in the United States unless it's relevant to why you fear going back to your country. Like if you've been threatened while here or done something here that puts you at greater risk in your own country, like maybe by being involved in protests of your country outside its embassy or consulate or something like that. But I do encourage you to include a paragraph about anything that has happened to you since you fled your country that makes it more likely that you could be harmed than was the case when you left. Or if something has happened that shows someone is still after you, you would want to include a sentence or two about it. For example, if your country just passed a law that makes your political party illegal and says they're going to jail members of that party, well, that's relevant to your case. Similarly, if people who were harming or threatening you have gone to your family members and asked about you or made threats, well, that's relevant and should be included in your personal statement. All right, moving on. Next, I encourage you to write one paragraph on the way that what you've been through has affected you. Describe how what you've endured has made you feel and any physical effects as well, if there are any. For example, if you have nightmares about what happened to you, or you feel scared when you see police officers because of what happened to you with the police in your country, or if you're depressed, all of those things are relevant, so you'd want to talk about them if they apply to you. Or if you've been seeing a therapist, or maybe been diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder or depression, that's important to note. If there have been lasting physical effects, talk about that. For example, if someone lost the use of their hand because of an attack, or maybe they've had constant headaches or pain somewhere else in their body, they would want to discuss this in their personal statement. The point is this: both the physical and psychological effects of harm can be important for establishing that you're eligible for asylum. So you should talk about them in a paragraph or 2 paragraphs at most in your personal statement. Do give a time frame for the physical or psychological effects you're describing. If something is still happening, say that it's still happening and say how often. For example, ever since the attack, I've had nightmares about it. This happens about 2 or 3 times a week. It is still happening. Or if the effects were limited to a certain time frame, explain that. For example, for about 3 years after the first incident, I would become terrified when I saw a police officer. This finally started to change once I left my country and got psychological counseling. Okay, the last part of your personal statement is this. It's a good idea to do a short paragraph about why it is that you can't safely live in another place in your home country, someplace different than where you last lived, or why it would be very hard for you to do so. This is important because the asylum officer or judge will want to know if you could avoid harm by just internally relocating in your country, i.e. by moving to someplace different within your own country. So you should try to address this in just a few sentences, assuming you do in fact have reasons for why the people you fear could find you anywhere, or why it would be unreasonable in light of your personal circumstances to expect you to move elsewhere. For example, if you fear a terrorist group in your country and that group has a presence pretty much all over the country, you would want to say as much. Or for example, if maybe there is a region in your country where you think you could possibly be safe from the people you fear, but you or your family members have serious medical conditions and the care that you need isn't available in that region, then you should discuss this. Okay, that's it. That's what I recommend for the structure of your personal statement. Note that you should not include at the end a paragraph in which you beg for asylum or in which you say how amazing America is and how amazing of a thing it would be for you to get asylum. People do this. I saw it all the time as an asylum officer, actually, but it does not help. Leave this out. Just stick to the facts. Okay, to recap, here's the structure that I recommend you use. 1 paragraph of background information, several paragraphs describing incidents that have happened where you've been harmed or that make you think someone wants to hurt you in the future, And again, this should take up most of the space in your personal statement because it's the most important part. Next, a paragraph on why you decided to leave and how you did so. And after that, a paragraph or two on anything that's happened since you left that suggests you face harm in your country, like due to a change in circumstances there or because of recent threats. Next, a paragraph on the ways in which what you've been through has affected you both physically and psychologically, if there have been long-lasting effects. And finally, a paragraph on why you wouldn't be safe anywhere in your country or why it wouldn't be reasonable for you to go and live in such a place. So that's it for how to arrange your personal statement. I know that took a while to get through. I appreciate your patience. We're going to go much more quickly through the rest of these tips. Personal statement tip number 4 concerns the length of your personal statement. Now, it would be understandable if you came away from everything I just told you about the structure thinking that you're meant to write many, many pages for your personal statement, because I just discussed a lot of different things that you need to include, right? Well, here's one of the challenging things about creating an effective personal statement. You've got to keep it short. Asylum officers and immigration judges don't want to read 20 pages of personal narrative. They just don't have time for that. If you drop a super long narrative on them, they're likely either going to ignore it completely, just not read it at all, or they'll just skim it, possibly missing important parts. You want to produce a statement that can capture their attention and keep it. And to do that, you've got to be concise. The personal statement has to be short. And another reason to keep it short, it's absolutely vital that you remember everything in your personal statement and that you testify consistent with it at your asylum interview or an immigration court. Many asylum applicants get denied because they end up saying things that conflict with what's in their personal statement or asylum application. For example, if you say in your personal statement that you were threatened 3 times, but then you testify later that you were threatened 6 times, well, that's a problem. It's considered an inconsistency. That can lead to a denial of your asylum claim. And what's sad is that often the inconsistencies are just honest, simple mistakes. It's hard to keep track of dates and other details in general, and especially when we're talking about traumatic events and you're trying to recall all this in the stressful setting of an asylum interview or an immigration court. Having a long personal statement means you've probably got a lot of details in it, a lot of things that you could accidentally mess up later just by simple mistake, which can hurt you. A longer personal statement means more room for error in terms of possibly testifying accidentally and innocently, inconsistently later. So it's better to keep your statement short with just the most important details in it, the details that actually matter for getting asylum. So how long should your personal statement be? I recommend not more than 3 pages. 3 pages of single-spaced, normal-sized font, but with each of the paragraphs being short, no huge chunks of text. It can be tough to get everything you need to say into just 3 pages. You'll probably have to write something and then keep editing it down to make it shorter until you can get it into 3 pages. It will take some work, but it's worth it to get to a personal statement that is concise and readable without fluff or irrelevant stuff in it. With some effort, you can get your personal statement down to 3 pages. All right, moving on to tip number 5 for your personal statement, which is all about how to describe an incident. The information that you present about an incident where something happened to you that either hurt you or makes you afraid that someone may hurt you is important. As an asylum officer, I saw so many personal statements where the person spoke in generalities about what had happened to them. For example, people will say, "Oh, some guys came and threatened me because of my political opinion, and then they beat me really bad." That's not very helpful. It doesn't give the asylum officer or judge the information they need to determine whether the harm the applicant suffered was serious enough to count as persecution, or whether the people who did it were motivated by a protected characteristic that the applicant possesses. To be clear, it's not enough to make an assertion that it was because of my political opinion. That's a conclusion that the applicant has drawn. The asylum officer and judge want to know what actual facts exist that indicate that this was, in fact, the case. So here's a framework you can use for describing an incident where you were threatened or harmed. Number 1, say when it was. If you don't remember the exact date, say it was around a certain time. You can refer to a holiday or season for reference if that's helpful. For example, in November 2020, a few days before the national elections would be fine. 2, say where you were and what you were doing when the trouble started. For example, I was walking down the road toward home by myself, coming back from my political party's meeting. Number 3, say who approached you or confronted you. If you know their names, include them. If you recognize them, explain how you knew them or where you'd seen them before. If you think they belonged to some kind of organization, say this and explain what it is that makes you believe this. For example, someone could say, I believe they were supporters of the political party that is in charge of the government because they all had on t-shirts with that party's logo on it. Also, indicate about how many people were there. If you don't remember or weren't sure, then estimate. For example, you could say, I believe there were around 7 of them. Okay, number 4, explain what they said to you. This is critical. Explain what they said when they first approached you, during any physical altercation or threat, and then also what they said at the end, like as they were leaving. Try to quote them. Use the words that they said to the best of your memory. For example, it's better to say, one of them said, if you don't leave your party and join ours, we will kill you the next time we see you, than it is to say, they threatened to kill me over my party. The words that people used while harming or threatening you are very important to your case, so please do try to use them to the extent that you remember them. All right, the next 2 are for incidents of physical harm. They don't really apply if you're describing just a threat. Number 5 in the list of things you should include when recounting an incident, describe in detail what they did to you. Be specific. If they hit you, describe what they hit you with, where on your body they hit you, and about how many times they hit you. For example, do not just say, they beat me with sticks. You should be more specific. For example, this is a better description. 3 of the men were carrying baseball bats. They hit me with the bats repeatedly, including on my arms, legs, and back. I don't know how many times they hit me, but it was a lot, at least 20. They hit me once with a bat on the side of my head. When I fell to the ground, one of the men kicked me twice in the stomach. State also about how long the entire incident lasted. For example, the beating lasted maybe 2 or 3 minutes. Say also how the confrontation ended. For example, the men finally left when I promised them that I would join their party. And finally, the 6th element you should include in describing an incident is any injuries you suffered and how you treated them. Describe in a few sentences, perhaps 1 paragraph, how you were hurt. If you had bruises all over, say that, listing some of the parts of your body that were bruised. If you were bleeding, describe where the blood was coming from. Say what you did to treat your injuries. If you went to a clinic or hospital, say as much and say what the doctors did to treat you. Did it require stitches, for example? Did they give you medicine? Explain these things and also say how long you were at the doctor's office or hospital. Also explain what the diagnosis was for any injuries. For example, the doctor did an x-ray and confirmed that my forearm was broken. I had to wear a sling for 2 months afterwards. Here's an example of a good description of an incident. On May 10th, 2019, 2 men came up to me right after I left the supermarket. I recognized one of them from my university. I did not know him personally. I had just seen him before, and my friend had told me that this man was believed to be a member of a religious extremist group. When they approached, that man told me that he knew that I was one of those people who does not respect religion. Then the other one said, we have certain ways of dealing with people like that. Then that man hit me in the stomach 2 times with his fist. The man I recognized slapped me in the face with an open hand and said, be careful what you say about our religion or next time it will be worse. Then they walked away. My stomach hurt for the next 2 days. Also, I had a red mark on my face from the slap for a full day, and my face was sore for a couple days. Okay, see what I did? I hit all the elements I said you should include, and I did it in just a few sentences. Last thing on this topic, and then we'll move on. If you're describing something that you heard from someone, like maybe a threat that got passed on to you through someone you know, explain how the person relaying the information to you got the information. For example, sometimes a bad person will pass a threat through someone's family member. For example, maybe the bad guys come looking for you at your home. Don't just say, they came looking for me at my house, or just, my family said they're looking for me. Rather, give more detail, like this, for example. My mother called me around the 2nd week of June 2020 and told me that, a few days earlier, 4 men wearing police uniforms had come to my mother's house. My mother told me that when she answered the door, the men asked for me by name, and they told my mom to tell me to report to the police station immediately because I needed to pay for my support of the people opposing the government. The men left after saying this, according to my mother. Okay, 2 personal statement tips left, and they're quick ones. On to number 6, which concerns style. A few quick things about the style and tone of your personal statement. First, use short paragraphs. It's annoying to try to read a full page worth of text without any breaks. Your paragraphs should be just a few sentences and should have a space between them. Next, use a normal font and a normal size. Use something like Times New Roman Aria or Calibri. The font should be something like 12 point, not too big, not too small. Also, use language you normally use. No need to use big or technical sounding words. Also, keep it serious. Don't try to use humor. This isn't the place for it. But on the other hand, also don't try to pull at the officers' or judges' heartstrings by being overly emotional. Better to be matter of fact than emotional, in my opinion. Don't use the word persecution. Don't say that you've been persecuted. That's a legal term of art. It has a very specific meaning, and it's the asylum officer or judge's job to determine whether what you've endured or what you fear is serious enough to count as persecution. When you say you've been persecuted or that someone will persecute you, it can be seen as you trying to substitute your judgment for the decision makers. Similarly, don't cite law or court cases or try to make legal arguments. Leave that to your lawyer. Okay, wrapping up, on to tip number 7. Your personal statement is about you and not about your country. As tempting as it may be, you should not include a bunch of information in your personal statement about the conditions in your country. The statement should be about you and what has happened to you or to people like you that makes you afraid of being harmed in your country. I've seen personal statements where people spend many pages giving a historical account of the politics and social structures in their country. This is not helpful. Asylum officers do their own research on your country and will know more or less how things are there. Don't spend more than a sentence or two on background information about your country. Rather, keep the focus on you. So that's it. Those are my top 7 tips for crafting a personal statement that can truly make a difference in your asylum case. I urge you to take the time and effort to actually follow these because I truly believe, based on my experience as a government asylum officer, that your personal statement can make a huge difference in your case. And I believe these tips can help you create a strong personal statement that puts you in a great position going into your asylum interview or immigration court hearing. Thanks so much for watching, and do let me know if you've got questions about any of this. I'm happy to try to help, and it's truly an honor to support you in your asylum journey.